Till date, I still remember the line. My very first line as a voiceover that I got paid for. It
Can you
was
share it?
now wow. That was it.
Just 3 syllables. Now, wow.
Now wow. That's how. Give me 5,000 naira. I was like, what? Say, come and collect your check. 5,000 naira.
Wow.
Wow.
Hi, and welcome to the Everything Voiceover podcast. I'm Tcode, an African voiceover talent from Nigeria, and this is my podcast where I take on voiceover topics from an African perspective. Sit back and enjoy this episode.
All right, guys, welcome to Everything Voiceover Podcast, the African perspective with me, Tcode. I'm your host, and it's my pleasure to have a very fantastic guest here. My guest for today's episode is West Africa's first voice director for animation, and he goes by the name Remi Olutimayin. Remi, it's a pleasure to have you with me today on the podcast. How are you doing, Remi?
I'm doing great. It's always fun talking with you.
It's always fun talking to you too. I mean, we've spoken on a couple of platforms in recent times, but then I want to do justice to introducing you properly this time around. I think in the past I've just gone straight to the point. You're West Africa's first voice acting or voice director, but now let me do a proper introduction of who Remi Olutimayin is. So, guys, Remi Olutimayin is, of course, like I said, the first voice director for animation in West Africa. He's a graduate from Babcock University. Remi's voice works includes advertising for web, radio, and television, documentaries, instructional content, training videos, events, live narration like a word announcer, voice of God, audiobook, automated messaging. It's also interesting that Remi's voice directing work started with the Our Own Area Animated series and expanded into projects like large cast and languages, like audiobooks and multiple narrations, internet audio series, medium form and long form narration, ADR, and so much more. Remi has worked on several projects, including an animation project which was a 4-time Oscar-winning Aardman animation. He's also an autism self-advocate. Wow. I had to take like an abbreviated version of your profile. It's much longer than this, and I was just skipping a couple of things and trying to put out the most, everything is important actually, but then this shows that you've been doing a lot over the years. Wow, Remi, nice to have you again.
Pleasure is mine. Pleasure.
And well done. So it's a whole lot to say that you're West Africa's first voice director for animation, and I really want to understand how that came to be. But before I get into that, I want to know who Remi is or who Remi was before voiceovers started, before voice acting or voice directing and all of that.
All right. Well, first and foremost, thank you for the kind introduction. So I believe that it's easier to say who Remi Olutimayin has always been rather than who was. And
yeah,
I've
it's
always
more correct.
Yeah, I guess. I've always been a storyteller, always. It's with stories that I understood the world, understood my place in the world, understood what it is that I wanted to do, understood my way around problems, understood myself in certain relationships. Well, generally in relationships, yeah. And it has been it's pretty much been the profession of my life, storytelling.
Storytelling, and that means as far as well you are still a child. You began doing. You once told me of the story of maybe when you were 4 years old or something, and watching all these foreign content and trying to do something with CNN. I can't really remember the details of that story. Can you tell us again what that was like, that experience growing up as a child?
All right. Sure. All right. So my father had a radio cassette recorder, a Sanyo. I keep forgetting the name of the model. Even as I'm saying it right now, I can see it in my mind's eye. And the day I figured out how to record on an audio cassette with it, which was simply just in case it was physical back then. Buttons were physical. You had to push.
Oh yeah.
And for that cassette recorder, you had to push play and record at the same time. And when I figured that out, I think it took me a while to figure that out. Once I figured that out, I just found a storybook and started to read and record myself reading it. Reading the characters, reading the narration, doing the sound effect for the crowds. Thank you, Ladybird Libraries, for such fantastic books like Great Turnip, Goldilocks and Three Bears. Brilliant stuff.
No, now this references you're making, are they just books, or they were audiobooks, or are they books that you read and used to practice?
They were just books. They were just books that I liked reading. As in, I'd been at. Let me just clear something up, right? The arrangement of the books were written to be read at a particular level. They were not advanced reading. They were not advanced reading. They were generally reading that I've always had interest in reading above my age or punching above my weight, educationally speaking. So I think they were suited for people of the age between the ages of 5 and 6.
And you were how old?
I was about 4 plus, yeah.
Wow, and you're reading. So and to put this in context rather, at the age of 4, you sort of stumbled on the ability to record yourself, and and I mean, although you just mentioned it briefly, but what was the process like? You mentioned these gadgets that you would punch, record, play, pause, and in my mind, I'm guessing, so you take one of those books and you read and record yourself, or what was that like? I mean, how did that go?
It was a bit frustrating because if I made an error, I would hear it, and I think that's probably the first time I tried my hand at editing. In that, if I go to record, I actually remember those. I remember those times. I would kind of gauge the length of what I would need to replace, and scroll back to that point, then record over that error. As you can imagine, it was pretty much, the final product was pretty much staccato, but it was my work. I'm proud of it.
The most difficult part of this to imagine is to imagine that a 4 years old was recording himself doing an audiobook. Yeah, I mean, I guess that was your introduction to the world of voiceovers, even though I believe you didn't know what voiceovers was at that time.
No,
so
it didn't exist. Yeah, it didn't exist.
So how did you understand, or how did you realize, what age and what was the experience like knowing that there is something called voiceover? Because really, for someone like me, there was a stage where I realized that there was something called voiceovers. And then there was another stage where I realized that you can make or earn money from doing voiceovers. And then, there's that progression. You're probably into it first before you start, making money, or about making money aspect, and then you want to get trained and all of that. What was the process like for you?
Well, to be fair to the people listening, trying to imagine what it was like growing up in the 80s and the 90s and voiceover stuff, and the first hurdle was accessibility. Because I could not see a way to access those things, it did not exist to me. It didn't exist for me. So there were people like Jimmy Sholanke. There were a lot of amazing series where you would see the person, the narrator, as in you would see him, and the narrator would be reading the story or reading the story back to you. And for me, that was it.
You're talking on TV, right?
Oh yes, on television, yes.
Yeah, for context, this is in the 80s, 90s in Nigeria, and
90s never went.
In the 80s, in the 80s, and this is Nigeria, where the only television running at the time was NTA. It was until the mid 90s when other stations, of course, were licensed. So we had 80s just NTA, which is also West Africa's first television station. If you're telling me that you were watching the narrator speak live, it wasn't. Did you see that as voiceover, or maybe your earliest introduction to what narrators do? Because voiceovers these days, we think studio, we think mic, we think behind the scene without the camera.
Like I said, I had no idea about access, so it didn't exist for me. All the things that are tied to voice, they had no little meaning to me. As like, even if I saw a video of what was the typical thing in music videos in the 80s was recording the musician singing in the studio, and using that as part of the music video. It didn't click to me that, okay, these guys, this is the stuff that people use for the voice work for animation. The concept was not real to me. The time that became real to me, that that I realized, okay, this is what this is, this is what this can be, was when let me see, how old was I? I was in Babcock at the time. Yeah,
this was in the 2000s.
Yes, 2000. This was 2002. Yeah.
Okay. And for reference, Babcock is a private university in Nigeria. For those who don't know.
Yeah. So as in 2002, there's a friend of mine who reached out to me saying that somebody was looking for a new voice with baritone. Now, all my friends knew me with my baritone voice. They also knew that I could mimic. They also knew that I enjoyed animation. They also knew I enjoyed characters. Actually, one of my favorite characters to mimic was Darth Vader. You get?
Dark Raider.
Oh, yes, Darth Vader. Why hasn't the Death Star been completed, Commander? Stuff like that. Then later, Mr. Smith, Mr. Anderson. It seems I could mimic like a whole range of people, but it wasn't work for me. That was what people who are idle and don't have a future would commit their lives to. That was my understanding of it. And
so you did vocal impressions, and at that era or at that time, it wasn't so much of a big deal. So people would easily spot you.
Oh, for a long time, I just consider myself to be a parlor trick. That's been, because the talent was there, but there was no outlet for it. There was no whether economic or there was nothing functional. It wasn't a functional thing in society. I mean, I wasn't a stand-up.
You mean voice acting?
Yeah,
or voiceover.
I didn't know it was voice acting. I didn't know. All I knew was that, was just being...
Okay, because you just mentioned that we're talking the early 2000s. And it's one thing not to know that there was something like voiceovers. I mean, it's not like people don't really know because you hear commercials on TV and radio, but you don't know, aside accessibility, you don't even know it's a thing, right? But then from the other angle, when you say something like, when you say it wasn't probably a grown thing at that time, it wasn't a full-blown thing, like a career that you make money off from, that paints an image of the voiceover industry in Nigeria, in the early 2000s.
Oh, it was a very small almost hidden community.
Mm.
You know? So you had to be of a certain age to even be aware of it.
Wow.
Understand? You had to be of a certain age. In fact, let me put it to you this way. The closest I understood about that being something that a child or young person could look to was Speak Out.
Speak Out.
Yeah, Speak Out was a children's oriented program where the children were the presenters, they were the actors, as in it was all the kids beginning to end. Yeah, they really had this breakout there.
Oh, yeah. They really had the
exactly. I think Funke Akinde. Well, they were quite. They have they have a class, like a set that went on to greater things. That came through Speak Out had actually tried to duplicate it, but they never got the formula just right. They never got the formula.
So let's get back to the voiceover community. Saying the voiceover community was a small community at that time. You had to be of a certain age to be a part of the community. Of course, I'm aware that we have the Association of Voice Over Artists in Nigeria. That's AVOA, but then your introduction to that small community, either AVOA or not AVOA, but then knowing people in the industry and getting to start working and rubbing shoulders with the people that had been there for a long time. How did that come about?
Let me just clarify something. I didn't rub shoulders with anyone. Like I did not rub shoulders with them because I did not know them. The person that first brought me into this was the great Yinka Oduni, and he's a producer. He was the one that he was the one that reached out to my friend saying, if you have anybody that has a deep voice, can you please have them come through? And it was quite an adventure going to meet up with him. But that was the first time I'd actually been in his studio to do something in his studio. Not that I went to the studio to go and visit somebody who was doing music or tagged along with other people. This was the first time I was actually in his studio, his sound studio. And Ada Otubelu, she was the producer from SO&U who was looking for a voice for one of the ads that they were putting together. And I didn't know it, But when I first showed up, Yinka was like, "Wow, okay, we are trying. Why don't you?" I think I gave him my mom's number or something like that. That was the early years of and he called me, said that, look, there's somebody very important. Why don't you come in and do this thing? So I came there. That's where I first met Ada Otubelu. That was my first casting. You get, and I failed.
And what year was this, by the way?
This was 2000, and I believe this was 2001. Either 2001 or 2002.
2000 and what?
Either 2001 or 2002. I really can't remember. I really can't remember. Those between 2000 and 2002 was a real blur for me. That was when I left University of Lagos, where I was studying chemical engineering, to go into Babcock to study mass communication. And it was I was going through so many transitions at the same time. So many transitions at the same time. And the good thing for me was that when I studied mass communication, when studying mass communication was what helped me conceptualize what a voiceover is. That was it was education that conceptualized it for me. And so when I entered the studio and they told me all these things and I bombed, I didn't quit because I had been educated that voiceover is part of a process. And I was really hungry to do more. I was really hungry to get in the process. So I asked them. So I asked where she worked. She told me her office. I didn't know any advertising agency. She said, "Oh, yes, that's one." So I said, "Are you going to the office now?" She said, "Yeah." I said, "Is it okay if I?" Sorry, I asked her if I could come visit in the office. She said, "Sure, no problem." I asked her if she was going to the office from the studio. She said yes. I asked if she didn't mind if I tagged along. She said, "Sure, no problem." So I followed her, got to her car, and we drove to her office from Surulere to Okwebi. And on the way there, I was telling her about copywriting and my assignments and how I never got anything less than an A. You know,
Wow.
the copy.
Impressive.
No, I was in, no, this is not the. I don't understand. I was always first in my class. Why can't you? No, that's genuine A's.
Wow.
Genuine A. So Mr. Kalejaye and Mr. Tejumai, they were my lecturers when came. And that's why I met Elias. I met Ayo Elias, and he gave me copywriting. He asked me to come back for a copywriting test, and I did. And I aced it. And
Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay.
So please go on.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, from what you've said, you've always been a very good copywriter right from uni days, and even the fact that your early exposure to the media and how you paid attention, even telling that story of your first recording process, that tells me a lot about how schooled you were or gifted you were in copywriting. And I enjoyed the story of the background to especially your first attempt to a casting, which you failed actually. But then in the story, you also mentioned ad agencies. Now, this is 2022. We're having this podcast, and things have really changed. 2020, 2001. We're talking almost 20 years ago. Over 20 years ago, and 20 or 21 years ago or so. And then in that story, you mentioned ad agencies. I want to understand the process of getting voiceover jobs. I understand that yes, it's a very small community, but who were the stakeholders involved or the gatekeepers? When the jobs came from the big brands or what have you, how did it get to the ad agencies and then to the voice actors and the studios, the producers? What was that chemistry, the nexus like at that time?
Okay, I need to be upfront about something. I had a very unfair advantage.
Unfair advantage.
Very unfair advantage. And that was the fact
Wow.
that I was studying. Not that I studied. I was studying mass communication. So
at the time.
So I shall put it, there was the part of the ecosystem I was exposed to, then there was the larger parts that I understood, I conceptualized without having to see it. You know. And for me, I realized that look, if I'm really going to get into this thing, I need to find my way from like the bottom. To start from the bottom up. And the bottom up for me, on my own journey, wasn't voicing, it was copywriting. It was actually coming together, putting together the words that voiceovers would use. So I came in as a copywriter. And at that time, what would happen, as I understood it, was that the advertisers, there's difference between advertisers and advertising agencies. The advertisers, the brand, whoever the brand is, and they meet the advertising agency to help get their adverts out, to produce, and they contract them to do that. And so the ecosystem at the time was that you would have your creative, you have your creatives, which is pretty much graphics and copywriting. You then have your client service, who would then run accounts, which is pretty much just an account was just a client, and they would send pitches to the client. The client will then agree or disagree. The client will then send briefs to the agency based on what they have agreed on in terms of the direction that they want the brand to go for the year. And
yeah,
they will then produce something out of that, send it to the accounts person. The accounts person will be the one, as in send to the creative director. Creative director will approve what is approved. They will then go with the client service person and defend the idea to the client. If the client approves, all well and good. You know, let me put it this way. I don't think, I never saw them defend an idea to a client. So I'm just assuming that the creative director always went with them. But I suspect that the client services people are competent, more than competent enough to sell the idea sell the pitch to the client. And once it's approved, if it's going to be radio or TV, if it's going to involve voicing, the voice element, they will then book a studio. And the studio, as well as the agency producer, would have a list of names that they felt comfortable to have on the project.
You mean voice actors?
So no voiceovers. So there was no. Please note, there was no voice acting.
Oh yeah.
In terms of that, it didn't. It literally
exist.
didn't. It didn't exist. You know.
So it's just voiceovers.
It was voiceovers. There's no commercial voice acting. It was just voiceovers, and it was that list that new people were competing with.
Okay, just for context again, this list was held by, was it the producers or maybe the casting directors of the creative agencies or the ad agencies?
The producer was the casting agent, casting director. It was between them and the producers and the studios that they would rent to record. Now,
so for a voiceover talent, right, to get jobs, you need to know the producers or be on their list.
It was
and just by chance,
it was
relationship before competence.
Yeah.
Wow. This is interesting.
The thing is that you could not blame them. It's not as if. Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
The main media at the time that almost anybody could afford to advertise on was newspapers. How is anybody going to hear your voice in a newspaper ad?
That was impossible.
It was impossible. And the cost, till date, the cost of a TV ad is it is much. You understand? In fact, if you tried it, you would owe people. You'd owe people for the next 5 years. And so you had to legwork from studios. You get addressed and things like that. The person who can give you the best background of that history or that time in your voiceovers in Nigeria would be Chioma BBB.
Oh, okay. We're still gonna have Chioma on this podcast sooner or later.
She put in the work. When she and I met, I was a producer already. That's how she and I met.
I didn't get that part.
I was a producer when she and I met.
Oh.
See, the thing for me, like I said, because I was studying mass communication, I already had an idea of the conceptualization of the ecosystem. So I knew that, look, if I work hard at being a copywriter, I can then move up to becoming a producer where I can actually see the work being birthed. And when I became a producer, that was voiceovers coming in, and I would record them and I would produce them. I wouldn't say direct because there's a particular temperament that you need to have to be the voice director. It's not about yelling at people.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I was producing them, and I'll frustrate them. They will frustrate me because we were not communicating. You understand? I was communicating as producer. They were communicating as voiceovers, and yeah, I believe it was in 2002. I was really itching to get this thing started, even as a copywriter, and so I became friends with the head of production at the time, Tolulope, and he had people. Yeah, they had his second in command was Remi Olutimayin. And I remember one those time I came up and I always used to come up and just hang out there. If I was done with my assignments or if I just wanted to think through, and because like I said, I'm a storyteller. I've always been a storyteller. Sometimes the story will only come to you in a particular physical setting. It's not, you can sit at the desk all you want to. It might not come to you that way. So, change of scenery. And there was something that they wanted to do that they had already done, but there was a line that had not been voiced. And they had already sent the voiceovers the artists had already left. So Remi was expressing frustration about that. So I said, okay, let me try it now. Now, it was around this time that SYU was experimenting with an in-house studio. So they had their mic set up, everything. So I said, let me try. He said, okay. And I'll give you the gist. Till date, I still remember the line. My very first line as a voiceover that I got paid for.
Okay.
Yeah. It was.
Can you share it?
Wow. That was it. That was my line.
Now, just 3 syllables. Now, wow.
Now, wow. But you and I have been in this work long enough to understand that to say now wow and to deliver now wow.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
So I delivered that now wow. You get, and with the right energy, the right pacing, the right, because I because of my time in copywriting, I understood the nature of scripts. I understood the nature of the story of scripts, so I can anticipate the energy levels that are required, the character interpretations. You get it. In fact, that's what my cold reading. My cold reading game is hard. As in, it's gangster. My cold reading game is gangster. Yeah, it's because of, like I said, working my way through copywriting. So I did that, and Remi was very difficult to please. Very difficult to please. But he was like, he started nodding. He was like, "Oh, this guy, you can do this work, we can do voiceover." I said, yeah. Okay. That's how. Give me 5,000 naira. I was like, what? He said, come and collect your check. 5,000 naira. Wow.
And that was huge money at that time. I mean, compared to now.
Compared to now, that was the first time I ever got paid for anything voiceover.
Wow.
It was encouraging. It was encouraging.
Wow. Wait, let me just for the sake of context again. When you say 5,000 naira, I want to know how much 5,000 naira would be in present day, because those are the period where naira was probably not up to 100 or thereabouts at that time, or thereabouts. Yeah. So how much would you say? What was the value of 5,000 naira right now?
To be honest, I'm not very good at that kind of mathematics.
Not like that's something to be paid 5,000 naira just to say now wow, that's impressive.
Well, now you need to understand, it's the client that could afford the cost.
That's another thing.
Yeah,
that's another thing. So wait, Remi, this is an interesting conversation, and what this is bringing to mind is, back in those days, voiceovers obviously was for a small community of voice talent, as well as those people that patronized this skill. They were
Yeah.
majorly those who could afford it, and not just now, like where we have almost any, even small and rising businesses
It's no problem.
patronizing voice talent, and but then the
Not about
payment is
open.
not. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say I do not see that as a bad thing.
True. True. I agree.
If anything at all, the way I look at it is this: if you have to deal with somebody's learning curve, uh, okay, that's fine. Just pay them the money but you also understand the person is using you to practice. But if the person has gone past that basic learning curve, or the early learning curves that would make the delivery troublesome, if they bring like skill and experience, you have to pay them their worth. Don't mess about. Don't mess. That is a dangerous game. Yeah.
Interesting. It's been a very interesting conversation so far. You've been able to bring us to from the 80s to the 90s to the 2000s, and let's go into when you became a voice director. I don't know which came first. Was it the area? Because I want us to also talk about that area moment. And area, for context, is the first animation project in Nigeria. Am I correct, Remi?
Well, no. Let me be more specific.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. You understand? But it's not the first animation project in Nigeria.
Okay.
First animation project in Nigeria that was given to the common man. There was no plan in terms of how to make money from it. It wasn't done for commercial purpose.
What you just said is the first animation project that was given, or can we say that was just available out there to the common man?
We just made it available. We did it. It was a story about the common man, and it was for the common man. We just put it out there. You need to understand the animation industry, the climate. It's not really an industry in Nigeria just yet. There are very specific reasons why. And people who have been in the international game in animation, they can speak better to this. They can speak to this a lot better than I can. But even back then, a lot of things it was really a challenge. I don't know why I keep forgetting his name. There was a pioneer of animation in Nigeria he passed away young. And when he passed away, his vision went with him. And so the people he had trained and led up to, right? He understood that advertising paid the bills, but there were experiments that he was running, you understand? And he knew that he would take losses running them, but it was also a particular gain. But when he passed, those experiments stopped. And the people that he worked under went on to become giants when it came to animation for advertising, motion graphics and things like that. Those guys were monsters. They are monsters. They are monsters. One of them, Boyo, monster. Let me explain to you what kind of monster he is. Somebody was trying to get work and reach out to one of Boyo's friends to say, can you please give an introduction? The guy said, okay, sure, no problem. And so the guy played demo of things he had done. Boyo nodded and said, okay, all right. Don't worry, if I need you, I'll call you. Boyo then called his friend and said that, this guy stole 3 of my jobs to put into his reel and claim as it.
Oh, wow.
The guy was embarrassed. Boyo told me this story. You get.
Wow.
As in, I've been producing a documentary on animation for like a while now, and so I just had a brief conversation with Boya about it off camera, and he told me the story. I was like, wow, this thing is serious. So yeah, that this guy he made monsters. So after I passed, everything, the focus went straight into advertising, went straight into commercial work, and nobody was really venturing into animation because there was no money there. There was no money there because nobody
except for advertising.
Except for advertising. Yeah.
And then we didn't even have streaming platforms that, or all of this new era.
The world was not accessible, bro. As in, like, if I tell you, I tell people, my students now, I always repeat this line. My students, my copywriting students, my creative writing students, I let them know that we live in a science fiction world. To me, the world that we live in right now is science fiction. For the fact that I can speak to you comfortably from my house and we are recording.
Yeah.
For the podcast, that is science fiction, bro.
Yeah. On some level.
I'm not trying to date you or talk down on you. I promise. Have you had to use a rotary phone?
A rotary phone?
Phone.
No.
And
by rotary phone, what do you mean?
You see, that is how blessed and highly favored and fortunate you are. Whew, rotary phone. Goodness.
Oh my.
Wow. That's analog. That was long before the digital revolution. As like that's analog. There are people who listen to this right now who will be like, hey, oh God. As in that's exactly what you're saying. Because
I experienced the landline and the GSM era, but I can tell this was way before.
Dial had to do with your eye-hand coordination. It had nothing to do with the device. Yeah. Oh.
Wow. All right.
Anyway,
yeah.
So it was my first venture into animation, into work for animation was voice acting for animation. That was in 2006. That's 2006 or 2008. There was a brilliant motion graphics artist named, his name is Remi Olutimayin. He's retired now. And very brilliant chap. Still one of the most brilliant people I've ever met in my life.
Wow.
He came up with this idea of doing a composition of 3D and 2D animation into one project. It was called Coconut Island. Yeah.
What year was this?
I think it was 2008. Between 2006 either 2006 or 2008. It's still a bit blurry for me when I think about it. I just know that the last
and you
want.
Oh, okay. And you mentioned the name of the studio.
Phobos Studio. That was his studio at the time. Then he brought in Nnamdi Woha. Now, please note that name. That name is very important. Nnamdi Woha as the 2D artist. Femi was a 3D guy. So 2D background, all those sort of things. They formed a pretty formidable team. And we did it was for a pitch. It came out pretty well, It came out pretty well, and that was amazing.
And I'm guessing you're the voice actor.
Yeah, I was one of the voice actors. Femi has the potential to be a great voice actor. His potential, as in, like I said, one of the most brilliant people I've ever met. He was just well-rounded, but I think the industry just kind of exhausted him, so he rested and went to do simpler things and be a more sane person. Nobody in animation is normal, so we're all mad. He left that asylum and went to join normal people in normal places, normal spaces.
Wow. No,
So yeah,
it's interesting.
yeah, he played one of the characters. Well, just like I said, it was a pitch. It was pretty decent. The art was fantastic. The voice acting, when I look back, yeah, for me, even right now, I look back at something I did 6 months ago and I cringe, which is evidence of personal growth. So it took less of looking back at 2008 or 2006. Now, Nnamdi Nwoha, right? After that, about 2 years, if it was 2008, then it was 2 years later, if it was 2006, then it was 4 years later, 2010. He reached out to me and said, I want to do something, I want to do an animated series, I want to do an animation, something. Are you game? And because of the work that I'd done with him and Femi, I said, sure, no problem. So he said, so see, it's called Our Own Area. And these are the I said, say no more, let's have fun. So so when we did it, there was no money for voice actors, for voiceovers. There was no money for voiceovers. And one of the things that he insisted is, look, we can't afford to have a voiceover sounding performance delivery. Yeah, this thing needs to feel guttural. It needs to feel visceral. It shouldn't sound clinical or neat.
Yeah,
it needs to be visceral. So that's how we saw eye to eye, because between my time as a producer and my time as a voiceover, it's easy for me to understand when a producer is speaking. It's easy for me to understand when a voiceover is speaking. They both use English or whatever language they're using. But the style of language is different. The references, context, very, very different. So that's how we did it, and we then came up. I said, okay, you know what? Check this out. Yeah, how are you introducing it? So I said, well, okay. I said, okay, how did you do this thing now? He said, what did they say on the streets now? Area. Okay, all right, good. So I went to the microphone. Area. Then
that area that you just said, the first area you said, was exactly how I used to hear it in the animation back in those days. Wow. Yeah. Incredible. Incredible. I never thought I'd be speaking to the voice behind area, but it's amazing. This was the era where I was growing up with foreign cartoons. I remember watching a lot of at this period, I think SpongeBob was picking up real fast, and the likes of the Samurai Jack and Powerpuff Girls and all of that Cartoon Network kind of stuff. But then area was something that, and I'm trying to put this into, I know you're speaking from the production end, I'm speaking from a consumer end. Area was more like the first original Nigerian, if not African, animation that had a very local setting to it. We could relate to it, and then the comic was the only thing we could relate to comically before was just maybe in movies or comedy shows and all of that. But then seeing an animation, kids could relate to it. I mean, as quick as you can imagine. So Area did a lot to someone like me, really.
Yeah. Voice acting and animation in Nigeria. A lot of animation, they owe a lot. They owe a lot to Nnamdi Nwoha. They owe a lot, because the thing is that there were many people who had been doing it. You get, but those people have been facing hurdles, incredible hurdles in terms of financial equipment, things like that.
Yeah.
Somebody will have made everybody made people who are interested in animation know that I can do it.
Mm.
You get like earlier on in our conversation, I said that I didn't go into voiceover work early because I couldn't conceptualize it.
Yeah.
There was nothing, there had no context for it. So it wasn't something real or it wasn't something real for me. But when Area came out, people just knew. As it was shortly after that Ajebo came out. You know, until date, people still mix
House of Ajebo.
Ajebo with when they talk to me about it.
Area.
They
Yeah.
mix it with Area because they it's not that they came out at the same time, but the rate at which Area started to enter the general consciousness of Nigerians. That's about the same time that Ajebo came out, you get. So they pretty much met both brands around the same time. But see, ever since then, so many things have come out. So many projects have been done. So many people's dreams have come alive.
And I was also trying to recall the distribution system then, because this was 2010, 2011. It wasn't like YouTube was it.
We just put it on YouTube and kept it. We just put it on YouTube and kept it going. TV stations
and people were just
we don't give them. We won't ask them for money. TV station, can we help take? Take. It will be take. What? Take. People were actually downloading it and re-uploading it on their own YouTube channels, which is one of the reasons why till date we do not have the accurate numbers for the first set of Area cartoons. In terms of view, we don't. We have no idea. As of right now, as of last month, the total views had reached about, I think, 6.7 million. Well, that's not accurate because
I can understand
those channels you get. So we don't know what the full total actually is.
And even TV channels and all of that.
Wow. Exactly. Yeah.
Awesome. This we've spoken about Area, but I'm yet to get a grasp on how you got into voice directing, because for you to be West Africa's first voice director, that means that you got into voice directing maybe earlier than voice directing became a thing in this coast. So what was that like for you?
If you enjoyed this episode, subscribe, leave a comment, and tell someone about it. Follow the podcast on Everything VOs on all social media platforms. Thanks for listening and see you on the next episode.